All right, so today I see that again on YouTube. We have a plethora of people talking about what bikes a beginner should buy, and you know, I think this is an way over talked discussion. Okay, the problem is, and this is the real problem. This honestly, the real problem with this whole issue is that there is so much that goes into buying your first bike. Okay, there's so many factors involved, and people keep trying to reduce it down to these simplistic terms: 300, 600 super sport. You know, it doesn't reduce that easily, effectively. Okay, there is a lot to deciding or buying your first bike, but in a practical sense, there isn't a whole lot to it. Okay, I would say your decision about what bike you're going to buy first comes out of probably three things. First thing, did you borrow somebody else's bike and wreck it? Okay, because if you did, you'll probably buy it, or you're going to pay a lot of money if you want to keep this friend. You pay a lot of money to get that bike fixed, and the guy will probably say, "Well, fuck it, here, you just buy the bike." A lot of times, I'm not saying every time, but a lot of times, people wreck their first bike they ride and they end up buying it. Okay, so that decision is sort of a moot point. Second case is guy falls in love with a bike. Ah man, my friends ride these Harleys, or I saw this Suzuki Brutus or Gladius or whatever, and I said, man, I gotta have that bike. That bike is me. It is the shit. I gotta have it. And they roll down to the dealer, and dealer sets them right up on it. Maybe they've ridden a bike, before years ago, okay, when they were kids, and they still have a motorcycle license or something like that, and then they decide they're going out and buy a bike. But remember what I'm just saying here. I'm saying it's not like the first bike they bought. It's just the first bike they bought in like 10 years or 20 years. Okay, it's really hard to buy a bike from a dealer if you don't have a license. I don't know of many dealers. I don't know of any dealers. I'm sure there's some, but I don't know many dealers that will sell you a motorcycle if you don't have a motorcycle license. And to get a motorcycle license in a lot of states, you have to ride a bike first to get the license, but not in all states. And we have to keep in mind there are some states where you don't need to have anything more than pass the written test and go into the DMV and pass the written test, and they'll give you a motorcycle endorsement. You can then roll down to a dealer and get a license. Guy will buy the bike, trailer it home. He'll sit in his garage, sit in his driveway, ride it around up and down the street. Maybe he won't wreck, maybe he won't kill himself, but that's probably how he's going to get that first bike. Now, and so that's cool, and that's cool. It happens with some people. Some people say that's stupid. It shouldn't happen. It should be legal. EU would curl up in a fetal position and cry its eyeballs out if they actually thought about doing that. That's all well and good, but some people, that's what they do. Okay, I will say this: that's what I wanted to buy, so I bought it. That's the bike that really made me want to get into motorcycling, so I bought it. Okay, and that's what I think a lot of people do. Okay, but the real issue is I don't think that people like that really care what somebody on YouTube says. Okay, they see something they want to buy and they just go buy it. Okay. The problem is when you have all these people on YouTube talking about what somebody else should buy. Okay, and I'm going to try not to do that. I'm going to try not to tell you why. I'm going to try not to say this is what you should buy. I'm just going to try to tell you some of the things that you need to keep in mind when you buy a bike. Okay, the first thing is there's always going to be somebody who tells you to get a slower, lighter bike than you want for your first bike. Okay. And I can see that there is an argument for doing that, but you have to remember that that is an argument for safety when it comes to motorcycling. And frankly, that argument, if you really think about it, is the argument that says, don't buy a motorcycle, okay? If you're going to buy a slow, light bike because it's safer than a faster, heavier bike, then you should just not buy a bike, and it would be safer than the slower and lighter bike. Just don't ride a motorcycle in the first place. You don't have to worry about these things at all. Just don't buy a motorcycle. Okay? Now, frankly, if you're going to continue to buy a bike, despite that, okay, you are now part of an elite club of people who do stupid shit because it's fun, despite the fact that it's stupid and they get killed doing it. That is what being a motorcyclist essentially is, okay? Now, I'm sure in some places there's an argument for buying a bike over a car because it's so much cheaper. You know, it's the fuel economy is so much lower, you know, so much better, and it makes financial sense to buy a bike instead of a car, like say Ninja 300 or whatever, because the 500cc bikes and above are taxed heavily. There's always that financial incentive for certain people, and for some people, again, this is a moot point. It just makes good financial sense to buy a Ninja 300 or an R3 or a KTM 390 or whatever, okay? And so if you're going to talk about finances, I mean, finances are finances. How are you going to work your way around finances? They are finances. If this is what you can afford, if this is what you think you need, you know, financially, that's an argument. There's no arguing with that, okay? Then you're splitting hairs about whether it's a Ninja 300 or R3. You know, whatever, that's fine. I'm not talking about that, okay? I'm talking about the beginner bike, the starter bike. You know, what bike should I buy first? What bike should I buy first for people for whom finances are not necessarily an issue? And the reason I say this is because for those people, you have to keep in mind that you can buy a used bike also. You don't need to buy a new bike. It's not necessary to go out and buy a brand new Ninja 300. You could buy a used Ninja 300. You could buy a used 600. You could buy a used 750. You can buy a used leader bike. Okay? Now, again, financially, of those bikes, the cheapest bike is going to be the used 300. Okay? Unless you buy a beat up, old, ragged, you know, leader bike for $2,000. Maybe it's a leader bike in good shape, but it's going to be like 15 years old for $2,000. Okay. That's always possible. The second bike, the third bike I bought was a, you know, FJ12, and it had, you know, 15,000 miles on it, but it had been, you know, down once, had some issues, and I got it for $1,500. Guy wanted to get rid of it. He was going to rebuild it. Decided he didn't have time. I bought it for $1,500. No question about it. I bought that for the same amount of money that I bought my Suzuki GS550, $1,500. And I put a fair amount of money in that bike. I sold it one day. Got $500 back out of it, despite all the time and effort that I put into it. You know, but it had served its purpose, it served its time, it served its need, and I was ready to move on to something else. So, you know, I can't say that, you know, I needed to go out and buy a $5,000 or $6,000 or $10,000 motorcycle, and it didn't make sense to me to just, you know, spend $1,500 on an old bike. It did. It made a lot of sense financially, and I don't think people should ignore that. Okay, so the only thing I really want to keep in mind here, people to understand, is don't buy into this bullshit about it's better to ride a slow bike fast than a fast bike slow, because frankly, you will ride whatever bike you get fast, okay, at some point. It doesn't matter what bike you get, you will ride it fast at some point, okay? So, yeah, you're not going to ride it at 150 miles an hour, hopefully, okay, but you're still going to ride it well over the speed limit at times. You're still going to ride it faster than you should at times. There's no question about it. It doesn't matter about what bike you buy. The difference is that for a Ninja 300, fast only happens after 30 seconds, okay? Whereas for a 600 or 750 or leader bike, it happens after like 10 seconds. Now, does that mean it's not safe for you to ride it? I don't think it matters once you're going fast enough how little power it has. Once you get it up to going fast enough, it's still going to be deadly. So my point is, there is no safety in not having power. There is actually, as long as you have enough power to get up to a speed where you can kill yourself, it's dangerous, okay? The second problem is not having enough power to stay out of trouble, okay? And this is where you have to wonder what's going on with the 300, where you have to rev the crap out of it just to get it to move. If it has no power off idle, okay, it will take you until you get into 10,000, 8,000, 9,000 RPM in first gear to actually get that bike to move. Now, the reason that happens is because it's geared so freaking short. And if you ever buy a Ninja 300, you ever ride one, you will find out you will whip through third gear before you get to 20 miles an hour. You'll be in the third gear before you get to 20 miles an hour, okay? Now, I don't know if that sounds safe to you, but to me, it sounds like any car, can crush me in the first 5 seconds I'm on that bike off the line, because I'm not moving. The bike might be, whining, and it may be pulling me a little bit, but I'm still going slow, okay? And it's only when that bike gets up to like 40, 50, 60 miles an hour that I start feeling like it's reasonably safe, okay? The problem with that bike is it takes forever to get to 40, 50, 60 miles an hour. It just does, okay? Oh, it's 4.4 seconds. I said, oh, it's 4.4 seconds, but it's most of that 4.4 seconds you're spending between 20 and 60 miles an hour, okay? It seems like if you look at those numbers, it's a fast bike and fast enough, and you don't need anything really faster and all this kind of shit. But the problem is those numbers are deceiving, because you just don't really have any acceleration with that bike. And I think that people are looking at this 0 to 60 performance. Imagine you ride like that all the time, full throttle through all the gears. Ween, ween, ween. Imagine that you ride like that all the time. Nobody really wants to ride like that all the time. It's not something that a sane person wants to do, is have to rag the shit out of their bike just to get decent performance out of it, okay? And what are you going to do if you get caught, cruising at 5,000 or 6,000 RPM, and you need to accelerate, and you open the throttle and there's nothing there? It just, there's nothing there. You have to downshift a gear or 2 or 3 to get it to accelerate, okay? You're toast, man, at that point. There's no power there. There's nothing there. I would advocate, quite seriously, a bike that doesn't even really have all that much peak horsepower, but has a good amount of torque, has a moderate weight, somewhere in the 450 to 500 pound range, okay, but will actually accelerate when you open the throttle at 5,000 or 6,000 RPM, and will rev happily to 10,000 RPM over a dinky little 300 that has almost no torque whatsoever, is geared short as crap to compensate, and yeah, it'll rev happily to 10,000, 11,000 RPM, and yeah, it'll do 4 second, 0 to 60, it'll do it, okay? But the major problem with it is, if you're cruising along at 5, 6, 7,000 RPM, you twist that throttle, but it does nothing but go wow, and it just doesn't move because there's no power there. Okay, there's no torque, and because it has no torque, the gearing is short as shit to make up for it, and even if it does accelerate, it only accelerates maybe 5 miles an hour. Okay? I think the ideal bike, and I don't care if it's first bike, second bike, whatever, the ideal bike should be something that has a good amount of torque in the mid-range and will respond smartly if you twist, maybe not overpoweringly, but smartly if you twist the throttle. Okay, and you rev it up to 6, 7, 8,000 RPM. So in my opinion, the best starter bike on the market today is something like the Monster 767, is something like the Ninja 650, is something like the FZ6, okay, is the better starter bike. It's not overpoweringly fast. It doesn't have, overpoweringly long gearing. It doesn't have a huge amount of torque, but it has a good amount of torque and a good amount of speed. It isn't that heavy. It isn't that big, okay? Yeah, it might be somewhat more than the 390 pounds that a Ninja 300 is, but it's still a decent sized bike. The only thing that you have to keep in mind with a bike like that is that it is far more expensive new than a Ninja 300 or R3 would be. There is no question that you are not going to walk out of a Ducati dealership with a 797 for less than $11,000. Okay, a new one. The good thing is that bike will be on the used market, and that bike will at some point come down. It will come down to about $4,000, $5,000 used at some point. Okay, not right now. And I think this is the great thing about the motorcycle market is, yes, we do realize that we wanted cheaper bikes. We don't need these, leader bikes that can do 100 miles an hour in first gear like the R1, things like that. Yes, but that doesn't mean we want a Ninja 300 instead. And I think it's a great thing that you're seeing Ducati sales reflect that. Okay, they have a whole range of bikes between the Scrambler and the 1299 that the market is really responding well to. BMW, as much as the S1000RR is a very, very fast bike and nimble bike and very, high performance bike, it's still a good bike for riding on the street. I think that's the shocks and the springs are definitely a little bit too taut for real roads, with bumps and stuff like that. But it's still a very nice ride. Okay, S1000R, nice ride. Okay, S1000R, nice ride. But still, you're not going to get into one for less than $13,000 new. Okay, and that's all well and good. Okay, but at some point they're going to come down in the used market. They're going to be available for about $5,000, $6,000, $7,000. Those bikes are what I would call decent bikes to buy for the road. An R1, a new R1, $12,000, $13,000. 5 years from now, it'll be a good price. The Suzuki, they're bringing in the new GSXR. I hear bad things about it. It doesn't have a balancing shaft. I think I would rather have the balancing shaft than the variable valve timing. Absolutely. So I think the old Gixxer is still going to have a strong market. There's a lot of bikes out there that would be good bikes to own. And I don't care whether it's your first bike or your fifth bike or whatever. I would never advocate buying any bike that wouldn't be a good bike. And I just can't see how an R3 is a good bike with no power. And again, don't get bogged down in that number, the 0 to 60 times. Don't get bogged down in those quarter mile times. That bike is slow. There's no question about it. And I simply say this because the only way it's even partially resembling fast is at absolute full performance, absolute full throttle through all the gears. Okay. And no one really wants to ride a bike like that for long. Nobody. That's just nonsense. Okay. It is absolute nonsense to buy a bike that can do 0 to 60 in 5 seconds and ride it at full click all the time just to feel like it's getting any decent performance. When you could buy a bike that does 0 to 60 in 3 seconds, 3.5 seconds, 3 seconds, and ride it at half of its full performance and have a great time on it because it's got plenty of performance, it's got extra performance. Okay? Would you rather buy a car that had 50 horsepower and have to rev the shit out of it all the time? Or would you rather buy a car that had 200 horsepower and happily ride it, half throttle or whatever, and use 50 to 100 horsepower? I think I'd much rather take the faster car and ride it at less than full performance and just enjoy it. And I think that's what you learn over time. Now the problem is, I say this, people are going to be blinded by that 0 to 60 number and miss the reality of riding it because they just don't know much about riding. And when you find out the hard way.